Sophie Carter pressed herself against the glass doors of the Riverside Hotel, watching sheets of rain hammer the street outside. Her vintage dress clung uncomfortably to her shoulders, and her carefully styled hair had surrendered to the humidity hours ago. The charity auction inside had ended 30 minutes earlier, but the storm showed no mercy. "Waiting for someone?" a warm voice asked beside her. Sophie turned to find a man in a slightly rumpled tuxedo, his dark hair damp at the edges. He held 2 glasses of champagne, offering one with an easy smile. His green eyes held genuine kindness rather than the calculating interest she had endured from most men at the auction. "Just waiting for the rain to stop," Sophie replied, accepting the glass gratefully. "Though I suspect I will be waiting a while." "Optimistic," he observed, moving to stand beside her. The weather report predicted storms all night. Her rideshare app showed no available drivers within 20 miles. "Wonderful. I should have left earlier." The helper with no name, "What kept you so late?" he asked, his tone conversational rather than intrusive. "I was examining one of the paintings being auctioned," Sophie explained, her passion overriding her usual reserve. An 18th century portrait that most people walked past without a second glance. But the brushwork, the layering technique, it was extraordinary. "I lost track of time studying it." His expression shifted to genuine interest. "You're an art expert?" "Art restorer," Sophie corrected. "Though currently between positions. I spent the last 3 years working for a small museum in Boston, but budget cuts meant letting go of junior staff." She caught herself embarrassed by her honesty with a stranger. "Sorry, you didn't ask for my life story." "I don't mind," he said simply. "It's refreshing to meet someone passionate about their work rather than their portfolio value." Sophie laughed despite herself. "That's a unique perspective for someone attending a $1,000 Purple 8 charity auction." "Perhaps I'm here for the art, not the networking," he suggested, his eyes twinkling with amusement. An accidental moment thunder cracked overhead, and the lights flickered ominously. Sophie instinctively stepped closer to her companion, then felt foolish for the reaction. He didn't seem to mind, his presence steady and reassuring. "I should probably find the coat check," Sophie said, though she made no move to leave. Something about this stranger made her want to extend their conversation, to delay returning to her empty apartment and uncertain future. "Before you go," he said, setting down his glass, "would you show me that portrait you mentioned? I'm curious what captured your attention so completely." Sophie hesitated only a moment before agreeing. They walked back through the now empty ballroom, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Hotel staff were already clearing tables, their efficient movements barely registering as Sophie led her companion to the gallery hallway where auction items had been displayed. The portrait hung in a small alcove, illuminated by a single spotlight. Sophie approached it reverently, pointing out details that revealed the artist's mastery. Her companion listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated real understanding. "You see how the light catches her eyes?" Sophie traced the air near the canvas, careful not to touch. The artist used a technique called glazing, building up transparent layers. It creates a depth that makes her seem alive, as though she might speak. "She looks sad," he observed quietly. "She was," Sophie confirmed. According to the auction notes, she was painted just before her marriage to a man she didn't love. Her family needed the alliance, so she sacrificed her happiness. The moment everything changed, they stood in silence, contemplating the portrait's tragic beauty. Then the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency exit signs. Sophie gasped, stumbling slightly on her heels. Strong hands steadied her, pulling her safely away from the wall. "Are you all right?" His voice came close to her ear, concerned and protective. "Yes," Sophie breathed, acutely aware of his hands on her waist, the warmth of his body so near to hers. "Thank you." They should have stepped apart. Professional distance, proper behavior, all the rules Sophie normally followed, demanded separation. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I should apologize in advance," she whispered, her heart racing. "For what?" he asked, his voice lower now, intimate in the darkness. "For this," Sophie said, and kissed him. His surprise lasted only a heartbeat before he responded, one hand moving to cradle her face as he returned the kiss with an intensity that stole her breath. It wasn't a tentative first kiss or a casual connection. It felt like recognition. It's like finding something she hadn't known she was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Sophie felt reality crash back. She had just kissed a complete stranger in the dark at a charity auction. This wasn't like her at all. "I'm sorry," she stammered, grateful for the darkness hiding her flaming cheeks. "I don't know what came over me." That was completely inappropriate. The lights flickered back on, harsh and revealing. Sophie got her first clear look at his face. Strong jawline. Those remarkable green eyes, now dark with emotion, and an expression she couldn't quite read. "Don't apologize," he said softly. That was the most honest moment I've experienced in years. It's disappearing into the night before Sophie could respond. A hotel manager appeared, apologizing profusely about the power failure and offering to call cars for remaining guests. Her mysterious companion stepped back, his professional mask sliding into place so smoothly that Sophie wondered if she had imagined the intensity between them. "Your ride," he said, gesturing as a car pulled up outside. The rain having diminished to a drizzle. "Wait," Sophie said, suddenly desperate. "I don't even know your name." He smiled, that same enigmatic expression from earlier. "Maybe that's better." Some moments are perfect precisely because they exist outside normal life. Then he was gone, disappearing into the hotel's depths before Sophie could protest. She stood alone in the gallery hallway, her lips still tingling from their kiss. Wondering if she had dreamed the entire encounter, the morning after Sophie's phone alarm jolted her awake at 6 the next morning. Today marked the beginning of her new position at Monroe Gallery, Manhattan's most prestigious art restoration facility. She had interviewed 3 weeks ago, accepting the position immediately despite knowing almost nothing about the owner except his reputation for brilliance and his obsessive privacy. As she dressed in her most professional outfit, Sophie tried unsuccessfully to forget the stranger from the auction. She had kissed him on impulse, something completely unlike her usual careful nature. Now, she needed to focus on making a perfect first impression at her new job. Monroe Gallery occupied a converted warehouse in Chelsea, its industrial exterior hiding the world-class restoration studios inside. Sophie arrived 15 minutes early, determined to demonstrate her commitment. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Grace, greeted her warmly. "Welcome. Everyone's excited to meet you. Julian doesn't hire often, so when he does, we know the person must be exceptional." "Julian?" Sophie asked, realizing she had never heard the owner's first name. "Julian Monroe," Grace confirmed. "He should be here any moment for your orientation." Sophie's stomach fluttered with nerves as Grace led her through the facility, introducing her to various staff members. Everyone seemed genuinely welcoming. Their passion for art restoration, it's evident in every conversation. They returned to the reception area just as the front door opened. Sophie turned with a professional smile, ready to meet her new employer. The smile froze on her face, standing in the doorway. Wearing an impeccably tailored suit and carrying a leather portfolio was the stranger from the auction. Her mysterious companion, the man she had kissed in the darkness. His green eyes met hers with recognition, and something else she couldn't identify. Surprise? Amusement? Concern? "Sophie Carter," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "Welcome to Monroe Gallery. I'm Julian Monroe, and I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Sophie felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The man she had kissed in the darkness, the stranger who had shown her such kindness, was Julian Monroe, her new boss. The billionaire art collector whose name appeared in every major publication, the reclusive genius who had built an empire restoring priceless masterpieces. Her hand remained frozen in midair, unable to complete the handshake. Heat flooded her cheeks as memories from the previous night crashed through her mind. The kiss, the intensity, her complete abandonment of professional behavior. "Miss Carter?" Julian's voice held a note of gentle prompting, though his eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Sophie forced herself to grasp his hand, the contact sending an electric shock up her arm. "Mr. Monroe, it's an honor to join your team." The words came out steadier than she felt. Julian held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture so subtle that Sophie almost missed it. Almost. "The honor is mine," he replied smoothly. "Your credentials are impressive. I've been following your work on the Renaissance collection at the Boston Museum. Your restoration of the damaged Caravaggio was particularly noteworthy." Grace watched their exchange with undisguised curiosity. Sophie realized they were still standing in the reception area, creating a scene that would fuel workplace gossip for weeks. The professional. "Masked, perhaps we should begin the orientation in my office," Julian suggested, releasing her hand and gesturing toward the corridor. "Grace, please hold my calls for the next hour." Sophie followed him through the gallery, acutely aware of his presence, just steps ahead. His office occupied the top floor, stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Restored paintings lined the walls, each one a masterpiece that belonged in a museum. "Please, sit," Julian said, moving behind his desk while Sophie settled into one of the leather chairs opposite. The desk created a barrier between them, transforming their dynamic from the intimate connection of the previous night to the stark reality of employer and employee. Sophie watched as Julian became every inch the successful businessman, his posture straight, his expression professionally neutral. "I want to address last night," he began, his tone careful and measured. Sophie's stomach dropped. Of course he would fire her before she even started. She had kissed her boss, compromised his professional reputation, demonstrated a complete lack of judgment. "I understand if you need to terminate my employment," she said quickly, trying to maintain her dignity. "What happened was entirely my fault. I take full responsibility for my inappropriate behavior." Julian's eyebrows rose. "Terminate your employment? Sophie, I hired you because you're the most talented art restorer of your generation. One moment of spontaneity doesn't change that fact." The impossible situation. Sophie blinked, confused by his response. "But surely having an employee who kissed you at a charity auction creates complications." "It does," Julian admitted, leaning back in his chair. "However, I seem to recall participating quite willingly in that kiss. If anyone behaved inappropriately, the responsibility is shared." His honesty surprised her. Sophie had expected corporate distance, perhaps a stern lecture about professional boundaries. Instead, Julian spoke with the same genuine warmth he had shown the night before. "I didn't know who you were," Sophie said softly. "If I had realized you were Julian Monroe, I never would have approached you that way." Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Hurt? The expression vanished so quickly that Sophie couldn't be certain she had seen it at all. "And that matters?" he asked quietly. "Of course it matters," Sophie replied, frustrated by his seeming inability to understand. "You're my employer. There are power dynamics, professional ethics, a dozen reasons why any personal relationship would be completely inappropriate." Julian stood, moving to the windows with his hands clasped behind his back. The morning light illuminated his profile, and Sophie found herself remembering how he had looked in the darkness, how his kiss had felt like coming home to a place she had never been. "What if I told you I attended that auction specifically because I knew you would be there?" Julian said, not turning around. "What if I admitted that I've been following your career for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to offer you a position at Monroe Gallery?" The unexpected confession Sophie's breath caught. "That's impossible. How would you even know about me?" "Your thesis on Baroque restoration techniques," Julian explained, finally turning to face her. "It was published in the International Journal of Art Conservation 3 years ago. I read it during a flight to London and found myself captivated by your insights. Since then, I've tracked every restoration you've completed, every paper you've published." He moved closer, though still maintaining professional distance. "When I learned you would be attending the auction, I made certain to be there as well. I wanted to meet the person behind the brilliant work, to see if you were as passionate in person as you appeared in your writing." Sophie struggled to process this information. "So last night wasn't a coincidence? You deliberately approached me?" "I approached you," Julian confirmed. "But everything that happened after was genuine. I didn't plan to spend the evening talking with you. I certainly didn't anticipate that kiss, or how it would make me feel. His vulnerability disarmed her. This wasn't the aloof billionaire from magazine covers or the demanding perfectionist his reputation suggested. This was a man who had orchestrated an entire evening just for the chance to meet her, who spoke about feelings with an honesty that most people guarded carefully. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Sophie asked. "Because I wanted one evening where someone saw me as simply Julian. Not Julian Monroe, the billionaire, not the owner of this gallery. Not the man whose approval could make or break careers," he said. "I wanted to be the person I was before all of this, before the money and the reputation and the impossible expectations." The weight of decisions. Sophie understood that feeling more than he knew. She had spent years trying to prove herself, to demonstrate that her talent exceeded the limitations others placed on her because of her age, her gender, her lack of prestigious connections. The weight of constant performance was exhausting. "What happened when the lights came back on?" she asked, voicing the question that had haunted her all night. "You changed." It was like watching a mask slide into place. Julian's jaw tightened. "Because I remembered who I was supposed to be. The role I play in public, the persona everyone expects, and I knew that if I stayed, if I asked for your name or your number, I would be complicating both our lives irreparably." "Yet here we are," Sophie said, "with complications multiplied 1,000 times over because now I work for you." "Here we are," Julian agreed, his green eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "And I find myself in an impossible position. I can maintain professional boundaries and pretend last night never happened, which would be the ethical choice. Or I can acknowledge that meeting you, talking with you, kissing you, was the first genuine connection I've experienced in years." Sophie stood, needing movement to process the emotions swirling through her. She walked to the window, looking out over the city without really seeing it. "You're asking me to choose?" she said finally. "Between my career and whatever this is between us?" "No," Julian said firmly, coming to stand beside her, but not touching. "I'm asking you to consider whether we might find a way to honor both. You're extraordinarily talented, Sophie. You deserve this position based solely on merit. Nothing that happens or doesn't happen between us personally will ever affect your professional standing here." The moment of truth. Sophie turned to face him fully. "That's an idealistic view. Office romances rarely end well, especially when there's such a significant power imbalance. If things went wrong between us, how could I possibly continue working here?" "Fair question," Julian acknowledged. "But consider this. What if things went right? What if we denied ourselves the possibility of something meaningful because we were too afraid of potential complications?" His hand rose slowly, giving her time to step away. When she didn't move, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "I'm not asking for a decision right now," he said softly. "I'm asking you to give us time. Let's work together. Let's see if what we felt last night was real or simply a moment of magic created by darkness and champagne and a beautiful painting." Sophie knew she should refuse. Every logical part of her brain screamed warnings about the dangers of mixing professional and personal relationships. Yet looking into Julian's eyes, seeing the hope and vulnerability there, she found herself unable to walk away. "Time," she repeated. "With clear professional boundaries while we're working?" "Absolutely," Julian agreed immediately. "In this building, I'm your employer, and you're my employee. Nothing more." "And outside this building?" Sophie asked, her pulse quickening. Julian's smile was slow and devastating. "Outside this building, we're simply two people who kissed in the darkness and might want to do it again." Sophie extended her hand formally. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Monroe." He took her hand, shaking it with exaggerated professionalism, even as his eyes danced with suppressed laughter. "Welcome to Monroe Gallery, Miss Carter. I have a feeling your time here will be very interesting indeed." As Grace appeared to begin the official orientation tour, Sophie caught Julian's eye one last time. The look they shared held promise and danger in equal measure. A silent acknowledgement that they were embarking on something that would change both their lives forever. The restoration studio had become Sophie's sanctuary. surrounded by centuries-old canvases, delicate brushes, and the familiar scent of linseed oil. She could almost forget the complicated situation she had willingly walked into. Almost working at Monroe Gallery exceeded every expectation. The resources were unparalleled, the projects challenging and meaningful, the teams supportive and skilled. Sophie had already begun restoration on a damaged Rembrandt, work that would normally take years to be entrusted with. Julian had given her complete creative control. Trusting her expertise without question, their professional relationship was impeccable. Julian treated her exactly as he treated every other employee, with respect and appropriate distance. During staff meetings, his attention never lingered on her longer than necessary. When reviewing her work, his feedback was constructive and purely technical. It was driving Sophie slowly insane, because outside the gallery, Julian kept his promise. Twice a week, they met for dinner at quiet restaurants where no one knew them. They talked about art and philosophy, childhood dreams, and adult disappointments. He told her about growing up in a small farming town in Iowa, how his single mother worked 3 jobs to support his obsessive reading habit, how he taught himself coding in the public library and built his first algorithm on a borrowed laptop. Sophie shared her own story. The parents who wanted her to become a lawyer, the art school, they refused to fund. The years of working multiple jobs to pay tuition while proving herself in a field that valued pedigree over passion. They discovered shared loves for obscure jazz musicians and terrible science fiction movies. They debated restoration ethics and argued good-naturedly about whether digital art qualified as true artistic expression. They laughed until tears streamed down their faces over stories from their respective disasters in early adulthood, and through it all, Julian never once tried to kiss her again. The breaking point, Sophie stood before the Rembrandt, her hand trembling slightly as she applied another careful layer of consolidant. The painting depicted a woman in shadows, her face half illuminated, expressing such profound sadness that Sophie sometimes felt the centuries dissolve between them. Beautiful work. Julian's voice came from behind her. Sophie startled, nearly dropping her brush. She had thought everyone else had left for the evening. Turning, she found Julian leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over one arm. He looked exhausted and somehow more real than the polished version he presented during business hours. "Thank you," Sophie said, setting down her tools carefully. "She's beginning to reveal herself. Another few weeks, and the restoration will be complete." Julian moved closer, studying the painting with the intensity she had come to recognize. "You've given her back her dignity. Whoever damaged this painting tried to erase her story, but you're helping her tell it again." The metaphor wasn't lost on Sophie. She cleaned her brushes in silence, acutely aware of Julian's presence in the empty studio. 3 weeks of careful boundaries and professional behavior suddenly felt suffocating. "Why haven't you kissed me again?" The question escaped before Sophie could stop it. Julian went very still. "Because you asked for professional boundaries. I'm respecting your wishes." Sophie laughed, the sound slightly bitter. "My wishes." "Julian, do you have any idea how difficult these past 3 weeks have been? Spending every day near you, wanting to touch you, to talk with you the way we do at dinner, but having to maintain this artificial distance." "Yes," Julian said quietly. "I know exactly how difficult it's been because I've felt the same way every single moment." The honest conversation, Sophie turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "Then why are we doing this? Why are we denying what we both clearly feel?" "Because you were right," Julian said, moving closer, but still not touching her. "There are power dynamics, professional complications, very real concerns about how a relationship between us might be perceived. And those concerns matter more than what we feel," Sophie challenged. "They matter because I refuse to put you in a position where anyone could question your accomplishments," Julian replied, his voice intense. "You earned this job through talent and dedication. I won't let anyone reduce your achievements to some sordid office romance with the boss." His protectiveness touched her even as it frustrated her. "Don't I get a say in that decision? You're so busy protecting my reputation that you haven't asked what I actually want." "What do you want, Sophie?" Julian asked, his green eyes searching hers. Sophie took a breath, gathering courage. I want to stop pretending that what happened between us at the auction was just a random moment. I want to acknowledge that every dinner we share makes me fall a little more. I want to stop being afraid of complications and just see where this goes. Your career, Julian began, but Sophie cut him off. My career will be fine, she said firmly. I'm good at what I do. Exceptional, actually. And if anyone tries to diminish my work because of our relationship, I'll prove them wrong through results. Just like I've been doing my entire professional life. The past that shaped him, Julian ran a hand through his hair. A gesture of frustration she rarely saw from him. There's something you should know. Something that might change how you feel about all of this. Sophie waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to reveal. 5 years ago? I was engaged, Julian said, his voice carefully controlled. Her name was Victoria. She was brilliant, accomplished, everything I thought I wanted. We met at a gallery opening, and she seemed to understand my passion for art. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. 6 months into our engagement, I discovered she had been recording our private conversations. She planned to write a book about life with a billionaire, complete with intimate details and business secrets. She never loved me. She loved the story I represented, the access I provided to a world she wanted to exploit. Sophie's chest tightened with sympathy. Julian, I'm so sorry. After that, I became very careful, Julian continued. I maintained distance from everyone. Built walls. Played the role of the aloof billionaire because it was safer than risking that kind of betrayal again. He turned to face her. Then I met you at the auction. And for the first time in 5 years, I forgot to be careful. I was just myself. And you responded to that version of me, not the public persona. The decision to love Sophie crossed the space between them, no longer willing to maintain artificial distance. I fell for the man who offered me his handkerchief and listened to me talk about paintings. The man who admitted he attended that auction just to meet me. The man who looks at restored art like he's witnessing miracles. Sophie, Julian breathed, his hands finally coming up to frame her face. If we do this, there will be challenges. People will talk. Some will question your abilities or my judgment. Are you truly prepared for that? I've faced doubt and skepticism my entire career, Sophie replied, covering his hands with hers. What I'm not prepared for is walking away from something real, because I'm afraid of what people might think. I've spent too many years being careful, proving myself, following every rule. Maybe it's time I took a risk on something that actually matters. Julian's smile was beautiful and slightly uncertain. I make no promises of perfection. I'm difficult and obsessive about work. I sometimes forget to eat when I'm focused on a project. I have terrible taste in movies, and I refuse to admit that pineapple on pizza is acceptable. Sophie laughed, joy bubbling up through her chest. I leave paint on everything I touch. I talk to the paintings I'm restoring like they're old friends. I cry at television commercials, and I absolutely believe pineapple belongs on pizza. We're a disaster waiting to happen, Julian murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Probably, Sophie agreed. But maybe the best love stories start with terrible odds and stubborn people willing to fight for them anyway. The new beginning this time. When Julian kissed her, there was no darkness to hide in. No excuse of spontaneity or champagne. This was a choice made with open eyes and full hearts. His lips met hers with a tenderness that spoke of patience rewarded and fears overcome. Sophie melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Julian kept her close. His arms wrapped securely around her waist. We'll need to be transparent with the staff, he said practically, even as his thumb traced gentle circles on her back. Human resources will need to document the relationship to protect both of us legally. And you'll need to report to the board rather than directly to me to avoid any perception of favoritism. Ever the businessman, Sophie teased. Though she appreciated his consideration of the practicalities. I'm protecting what matters, Julian corrected. Your reputation, your career, and this fragile, beautiful thing growing between us. Sophie pulled back enough to meet his eyes. It doesn't feel fragile. It feels like the most solid thing in my life right now. Then let's see where it goes, Julian said, echoing her earlier words. No more hiding, no more artificial boundaries. Just two people navigating this complicated, messy, wonderful thing called love. As they stood together in the empty studio, surrounded by centuries of art and stories of human connection, Sophie realized that she was creating her own masterpiece, not on canvas, but in the brave choice to open her heart despite the risks. To trust in something real despite the complications. The Rembrandt watched from her easel, the woman in the painting seeming to smile knowingly. Perhaps she understood across the centuries that the greatest art was always created through vulnerability. Through the willingness to reveal one's true self despite the danger. Sophie leaned up to kiss Julian again. Softer this time, a promise rather than a question. He responded with equal tenderness, his arms tightening around her as though he would never let go. Outside the studio windows, the city lights began to sparkle against the gathering darkness. But inside, surrounded by restored beauty and newfound love, Sophie had never felt more clearly illuminated. She had taken a chance on a stranger in the darkness, and he had transformed her entire world into something brighter than she ever imagined possible. Sometimes the best decisions really did look like mistakes at first glance. And sometimes the courage to kiss someone like you meant it led to discovering that they meant it too. The end.